The only thing that stays the same is that everything is always changing. Our bodies know this. We shed almost 1 million skin cells every day, which is really gross if you think too hard about it. But it's also pretty miraculous. The largest organ in the human body, the organ that protects us and keeps us in one container, is both permeable and ever-changing. But while our bodies are ever-changing, our minds sometimes forget that impermanence is at the heart of existence. Our hearts forget as well. The Buddhists talk about the dangers of attachment. When we hold on to our memories of the way things were, or our expectations of the way things should be, or our dreams of the way things could be, we create suffering within ourselves. Because there's a gap. There's a gap between our memories, expectations, and dreams and the way things actually are here and now in the present moment. Now, attachment is very human, very understandable, but letting go, coming into the present, sinking into and delighting in what is, helps us find joy and clarity and peace. When we stop trying to control or grasp, when we flow, when we give and take and learn and choose with easefulness, our lives unfold with beauty and with grace. It's as simple as breathing in and out. And yet the skill takes a lifetime to master. And because it's a difficult skill to master, we must practice it with a great deal of self-compassion. Kristen Neff has studied the science of self-compassion. She divides it into 3 components: self-kindness, a sense of common humanity, and mindfulness. She writes, self-kindness entails being warm and understanding toward ourselves when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than flagellating ourselves with self-criticism. It recognizes that being imperfect and experiencing life difficulties is inevitable, so we soothe and nurture ourselves when confronting our pain, rather than getting angry when life falls short of our ideals. We clearly acknowledge our problems and shortcomings without judgment, so we can do what's necessary to help ourselves. We can't always get what we want. Can't always get what you want. We can't always be who we want to be. When this reality is denied or resisted, suffering arises in the form of stress, frustration, and self-criticism. And when this reality is accepted with benevolence, however, we generate positive emotions of kindness and care that help us cope. So how are you at being warm and understanding of yourselves rather than self-flagellating? This has been a real challenge for me in my life. Sometimes I call myself a perfectionist in recovery. One trick that I found helpful is to insist on the same standards for kindness in my thoughts toward myself that I insist on when it comes to communicating with others. So when I begin to go down that road of self-critique and self-flagellation, I say to myself, would I say something like that to another person, a person who I cared about, a person who I loved? And if the answer is no, then I just stop saying it to myself. See, the ultimate destination of the road of self-critique is self-loathing, and self-loathing is at the heart of addiction and narcissism and a number of other difficult thought patterns. So it's not a place I want to go. It's not a place I want anyone to go. So there's the way to turn aside, one way to turn aside. Now, Neff's second component of self-compassion involves reclaiming a sense of common humanity, which frees us from a sense of isolation. As she puts it, when we notice something about ourselves we don't like, we irrationally feel like everyone else is perfect, and it's only me who's inadequate. This is not a logical process, but a kind of distorted self-centeredness. Focusing on our inadequacies gives us tunnel vision so that we can't see anything else but our own feeble, worthless self. Similarly, when things go wrong in our external lives, we feel that somehow other people are having an easier time of it, that our own situation is abnormal or unfair. When our experiences are interpreted from the perspective of a separate self, we have trouble remembering the similar experiences of our fellow humans. Self-compassion recognizes that life challenges and personal failures are just a part of being human, an experience we all share. In this way, it helps us to feel less desolate and isolated when we are in pain. Now, one of my favorite jokes, and I know I've told it before, is that, they held a conference for adult children of functional families, and no one came. So similarly, if we were to host a convention for perfect people, no one would be eligible. And this is part of why I'm a universalist. If only perfect people get to heaven, it would be an empty and very, very lonely place. We reclaim our sense of common humanity every week in this church when we lift up joys and sorrows. When we say sorrow and joy come into every life, we all experience loss, failure, and disappointment. We all make mistakes. Being human is hard, but when we remember that it's hard for everybody, we give ourselves and one another a little more grace. We look around and realize, hey, we are doing this hard thing. It's like the moment when my spiritual director, after listening to me whine for 3 years about how hard it was to balance being a minister and parenting young children, umpteenth time, I said, "This is impossible, I just can't do it." She looked at me and said, "Elizabeth, you keep saying it's impossible, but you've been doing it and doing pretty well for 3 years now, so I think you should stop saying that." It's kind of like Princess Bride. I do not think that word means what you think it means. Lastly, Neff advocates for mindfulness, writing, "Mindfulness is a non-judgmental, receptive mind state in which thoughts and feelings are observed as they are without suppressing or denying them. You can't ignore your pain and feel compassion for it at the same time." What's key here for me is the shift from seeing flaws and painful feelings as something bad that we need to get rid of, to seeing them as a holy part of who we are, worthy of love and compassion just like the rest of us. We embrace them and experience them fully. And I think when we do this, the sharp edges begin to soften. All the parts of our imperfect selves and all of the parts of our imperfect lives are welcomed and appreciated, and as we do this, as we welcome them, they stop yelling to get our attention. I've actually seen this work with physical pain. Sometimes when my joints are aching before I medicate myself, I spend some time meditating, and I imagine breath and compassion flowing toward each sore spot, just saying, "I see you, I hear you, and I understand that you exist to help keep me safe. I'll be more gentle, I promise." And sometimes the pain eases. Sometimes I still need to go get out the Bengay. But it works a lot better and more reliably with emotional pain. When grief comes, if I try to suppress it or ignore it, it gets bigger and louder until I can't think of anything else. If I let it flow through me, it passes like a rainstorm. When I'm angry, if I stuff it, I get tense and irritable and it leaks out all over the place. If I ask that anger what it's there to teach me, because anger is just our spirit's way of telling us that something is wrong, I listen to it and learn its lesson, and the anger dies down. Buddhist blogger Bobby Emmel, after hearing a talk by Neff, who I referenced earlier, wrote about her own internal barriers to self-compassion, some of which are a result of cultural conditioning. She articulates these barriers as four mythical beliefs about self-compassion, and I think they're worth sharing because they resonated with me, and I'm thinking maybe some of them will resonate for you, some of the ways that self-compassion can be hard. And the first myth is, I'm just indulging myself if I'm self-compassionate. Emmel differentiates between self-indulgence and self-compassion, writing, "Self-compassion involves your health and well-being. Self-indulgence is about getting anything and everything you want without thoughts of well-being. Self-compassion is about becoming aware of and sitting with your pain. Self-indulgence numbs and denies your pain. So that's the difference between self-indulgence and self-compassion. The second myth she lifts up, I won't be motivated if I don't criticize myself. She writes, somewhere deep down, you and I might actually believe that we need that inner critic to keep us motivated in life, and that without it, we too easily stray outside the lines. And it's also possible that the critic evolved to help keep us safe from harm. But guess what? We don't need it anymore. Being compassionate with ourselves allows for a much healthier, kinder motivation. I think about, so I think about my eating habits, right? So you can tell by looking at me, I'm not perfect. And when I try to diet and I try to be very critical of, this food is bad and that food is good, I can't stick to any kind of a plan for any length of time because I just lapse into self-indulgence. When I think about it as self-care, what I eat helps me feel better or makes me feel worse. When I come at it from that perspective of what does my body need to be nourished and strong, then everything unfolds effortlessly. And I think life is like that too. When we think, okay, I need to do this, or I have to do this, or these are the goals, and I'm going to set them up and I'm going to make them, it's forced. And it's harder to stick to, and then we don't make it, and then we beat ourselves up for not being disciplined enough, right? But if we start from this place of absolute acceptance, and then tap into a deep desire to flourish, then things unfold. And that's, I think, the motivation that leads to lasting change. So, her third myth, it's selfish to be compassionate toward ourselves. She writes, many people, women especially, are taught to always put others ahead of themselves. Self-compassion can seem like the opposite of what you should be doing, which is taking care of everyone else. But how will beating yourself up help you be kinder to others? The source of our compassion will only be more authentic when we're able to show compassion to ourselves first. The old thing about putting your own oxygen mask on first. And the fourth myth she lifts up, self-compassion is for wimps. Put on your big girl panties. Stop whining. Man up. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Our society, she writes, tends to reward toughing things out more than it does being kind and nurturing to yourself. But the truth is that the strongest people are also the ones who can buck cultural norms and feel genuine compassion for themselves and their circumstances. I'm going to read that again. The strongest people are also the ones who can buck cultural norms and feel genuine compassion for themselves and their circumstances. So as we head into this time of self-reflection and letting go, I invite you to breathe some self-compassion. We're going to start by letting go of some stuff, okay? So taking a deep breath, and then breathe out shame. It can help to kind of like shake your hands. Anything you feel shame about, let it go. Okay. I lost my place. So we just did shame. Okay. So now we're going to let go of self-doubt, self-critique. Ready? Deep breath. Breathe out. And now, all of those internal voices that try to convince you that you're not worthy of compassion or understanding and love, if you have those, breathe in and breathe them out. Okay, let's do one more. Let go of whatever else you need to let go of. Now we're going to breathe in kindness toward ourselves. And we're going to make sure that our self-talk is just as skillful as our communication with others. So breathe in. Feel yourself filled with kindness. And breathe in a sense of solidarity with our fellow flawed and magnificent humans, both in this room and beyond. And a last breath to remember our human superpower. Well, we can't control much outside of us. We can control our thoughts. We can choose our responses to everything that life throws at us. We're going to sing together now a prayer based on the Buddhist